Hello, I'm Robert, a voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is about why the US can't invade Greenland. There's nothing that Trump can do that could end with a military control of Greenland or could end with the Greenlanders selling or giving Greenland to the United States. It's simply not going to happen. And so I'll go through the main things that you ask us about, and first quickly, then more slowly. So first of all, we quite often get people saying, is the United States about to do something like it did in Venezuela, fire missiles at Greenland, and or get helicopters come in and to try and abduct people or something like that? No, it's not going to do that, because the United States is already in Greenland. It's got a big base there, and it used to have 10,000 people in Greenland. It's now only got 200, and that's because the United States decided didn't want to have 10,000 people there. So if you want to send in, a few hundred soldiers in helicopters, they just say to Greenlanders, we want to send in 200 people in helicopters. They wouldn't need to do any missile strikes. They wouldn't need to surprise them or anything. They say, expect us to, and they say, okay, fine, expect to see you tomorrow. So it's not going to be like that. And then because the Greenlanders, they've made it very clear they don't want to be Americans. So the only way that the Americans could take over Greenland is by military control. They couldn't do it by elections. They couldn't do it by votes. They're never going to vote to be part of the United States. And so the Greenlanders, they're not going to fight back. When if they get the American army coming in with tanks and with soldiers and so on, and going up and down the streets with tanks, they're not going to start shooting at them back. They're just going to do constant peaceful protests, just like they didn't try fighting back in Georgia. Just every day, and then in large numbers at weekends, probably 9,000 or more out of the population of 50,000 would be 20,000 of the Nuuk, the main capital, about 20,000 there, and probably nearly half, or maybe even more than half of it, would just be out there every day until the Americans leave. So that's what they do. And NATO wouldn't fight back. It'd be ridiculous to start a military exchange of some sort with the United States. They're never going to do that. They're very close allies. And then the second thing is that there's no way that Greenland would actually even become a United States in that way. If Trump somehow managed to set up a military junta taking control of Greenland without the support of the population of Greenland, then it's what they call the Supremacy Clause, Article 6, Clause 2 in the US Constitution, which says that any treaties are the law of the land in the United States if they're treaties that the United States has ratified. And so the United States ratified the NATO Treaty, it's ratified the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties, it's joined the all the things that set up the UN and so on, the United Nations Treaty, which was set up to stop wars in the future by respecting boundaries and not starting illegal invasions and so on. And so if Trump was to declare Greenland from now on is a US state, there not be an unconstitutional election, unconstitutional executive order, and the Supreme Court would just strike it down. And so Greenland wouldn't become a US state. There's no way to get from here to any situation in the future where Greenland is legally part of the United States, unless the Greenlanders want to. And they can't do it by forcing them to, because that would be coercion, and a treaty obtained by coercion is void in international law. So then the other thing is that Trump, suppose he was to abuse his pardon power. So this is a rather unique capability the President of the United States has, that he can pardon any criminal that has been as long as he was convicted in a federal court. So suppose he was to abuse his pardon power, and he found 1,000 soldiers. So as I just said in the previous bit, that the soldiers and generals are trained in law of war, and they would refuse an illegal order, and they're trained, they get yearly training saying, this is, if you obey an illegal order, you're personally responsible, you can end up in jail because of that, you become a criminal. And so these soldiers and generals are not going to obey an illegal order, and they will know perfectly well that if Trump tells them to do it, it doesn't make it legal. But suppose, hypothetically, Trump, he found 1,000 soldiers, sort of MAGA Republican soldiers who are strongly loyal followers of him, and they decide they still wouldn't want to do it because they don't want to be in prison, and they don't want to leave there and have a court martial and leave with dishonor. But suppose that Trump promises to them and says, you do this for me, and I will pardon all of you. Well, the pardon power can't stop the trials. So after these 1,000 people he sent them to Greenland, and they're in Greenland running this military junta. They're not letting anyone vote. They're not letting anyone go into parliament. They're doing all sorts of things that are completely illegal, and stopping any imports from Denmark and forcing, and instead accepting imports from without tariffs and without and they put tariffs on any imports from Greenland too, from Denmark to Greenland and so on. All sorts of things they'd have to do if they're pretending it's the United States territory. Then this would immediately, there would be court cases against these soldiers, and the BBC News, the United States News would be full of all these court cases, and if there are 1,000 soldiers, there'd be 1,000 court cases, and they'd all get criminal convictions probably, and prison sentences. So then, after however long it takes for all those criminal convictions to go through the courts, and that'd be big news in the United States, then Trump says, I'm going to pardon you all. And he just pardons them all, says none of them are going to prison. Well, the next thing after that is that Trump is impeached, except he would have been impeached long before this time. But as we'll see in a minute. And so then there's actually all this is supposed to be about a threat to Greenland from China or Russia, but looking into it deeply, there's no threat. There's neither have the capability to take the island. The 200 US soldiers there, with modern technology, they're more than adequate to keep out China and Russia. Because China and Russia have nothing that can actually get there. They haven't got any aircraft carriers. Their ships are very vulnerable. No Chinese warship has got anywhere near Greenland in the last 1 or 2 decades. So if the and then if they were to start anything, and you get the notice that there's an armada of Russian warships heading off for Greenland or something, then there's plenty of time to ship in thousands of soldiers to help defend Greenland. So the closest Russian military ships don't sail up to Greenland either. The closest they get is an island called Svalbard, which is a little bit to the west, 300 kilometers to the west, also Danish, and they sail around there sometimes. But that's safe too. Russia couldn't take over Svalbard. It's far too far away from Russia. So there's no way that Russia or China are going to be taking over Greenland, or even try to do it. The only military ships they have in that area are the submarines, and you can't mount an invasion from a submarine. You have these huge nuclear submarines that would dock in Nuuk, and then all the soldiers come marching out of the submarine and try and take over Greenland. That's not going to work. So it just can't be done. And then, so what is going to happen? Well, Trump is going to be stopped at one point, one way or another. And he might well back down of his own accord, maybe with some kind of symbolic victory. That's often how these things end. And we've had quite a few of these spectacles with Trump in the past. But if he doesn't, the Republican legislators, they will force him to stop one way or another, and if necessary, even impeach him. So that is the new thing here. That's the first Republican legislator now to say that he would impeach Trump. This is Don Bacon. So we're going to look down there. So Don Bacon thinks it's just a negotiating tactic, but it's unacceptable. So he thinks that Trump is just saying all this and bluffing about going into Europe, because see, that's the way he does. He starts off high with some extreme threat, and then he ends up that actually wants to do is to buy one carrot from Greenland or something. You know, it's like someone who comes up to a shop and he says, and he sort of gets out a whole arsenal of weapons, and he has a whole lot of strong men around him and big people, all sort of threatening the shopkeeper, and he says, I want to buy one of your carrots for half price, and that's what it's all about. You know, Trump's a bit like that. So anyway, so he thinks it's Don Bacon thinks it's just a negotiating tactic, but it's totally unacceptable to use this as a negotiating tactic in his view. So he says Republicans have to speak up and stop him, but on the remote chance, and it makes no sense, because he doesn't need to negotiate for everything that he says he wants from Greenland, apart from making it part of the United States, which is never going to happen. And if he's trying to negotiate about anything else, he would just say, can we have 10,000 soldiers in Greenland? And the Greenlanders would be delighted. Say, yes, of course. Come tomorrow if you can. And then if he was to say, well, we want to get some US firms in to help to do a commercial mining of the minerals in Greenland. And the Greenlanders say, well, yes, great. We've been trying to attract your attention for years. And it's quite difficult. But if you're interested to sink the money that's necessary to start the investment, then we expect you to be able to get quite a lot of profit back from it. And do come and do it. We're very keen for that, as long as you respect the environmental laws that we have, which are quite strict in some ways. And then, because the very cold environment, it doesn't. You need to be very especially careful about pollution, from past experience. So that's it, you know. So here we are. We're going to look at the interview, and Don Bacon, he mentions what I already mentioned in the previous video, that in my previous debunks, that the Supreme Court, and he says that maybe they will rule this week or the coming week. So he seems to think it could happen quite quickly. This is about the tariffs. So because Trump's threats at the moment, I'm sure most of you know, is he's threatened to take out 10% tariffs against United Kingdom and Denmark and France and many other countries, just for trying to do a NATO exercise in Greenland. It's a very strange thing, and it turns out he's probably misunderstood what was going on. I'll come to that in a minute. But anyway, Don Bacon was saying, well, maybe the Supreme Court will rule this week or this coming week that the tariffs are unconstitutional. It's from all the arguments, it seems pretty likely that will be their conclusion. And the main question really is whether they will also say that the United States government has to pay back the $200 billion they've already collected in tariffs to the people they collected it from. That was mainly what they were discussing during the oral arguments, whether that's what they would do or not, the practicalities of doing that. So just on tariffs alone, he disagrees that Trump shouldn't have done that. And he says all the stuff about invading Greenland, he says, I believe it's really being done for negotiating effect. But he says it almost every day. And so he feels that it's very important for Republicans to step up and say, this is not us. It's not how we think. So he explains that the Greenland's been a great ally. They've been based on there since World War II. That's since the beginning of World War II, not the end of World War II. And he's fought with us and on our side in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and so on. And so I said, on the weird chance that he's serious about invading Greenland, I want him to know that that would probably be the end of his presidency. That's a Republican saying to Trump. Most Republicans know, and he's from the House, so he knows the other Republicans in the House. Most Republicans know this is immoral and wrong, and we're going to stand up against it. So what would happen? Well, if he thinks that one way or another that it would lead to an impeachment. So he thinks, and this is Don Bacon, Republican in the House, and he can speak more freely than most of the House Republicans because he has already decided to retire in 2026. So he doesn't need to worry about what the voters are going to say. He doesn't need to worry about Trump withdrawing support for his re-election because he's not going to run for re-election again. But he makes it clear he's speaking for other Republicans that aren't so free to talk as he is. And so I says it's immoral and it's wrong, and I think it would lead to impeachment. Invading an ally is a high crime and misdemeanor, that's the clause that if you impeach a president, you can't it's not just like a approval rating in the United States, where in the United Kingdom, where he just loses the approval of Parliament, he loses the confidence of Parliament. In the United States, it's got to be for a high crime or misdemeanor. And he says, well, in his view, it is, if that's what Trump did. And then there's this Monroe Doctrine, which is to do with the doctrine of the entire Western Hemisphere, which for them means the Americas, that it needs to be under the control of the United States, essentially. And they're saying, well, Greenland is an ally of the United States, so it's not against this Monroe Doctrine. And the United States can have as many bases there as it likes. And they used to have 14 bases, he thought, so other people said 17. Probably depends how you count them. And so he said that they should just be saying, what do we really need? Do we need to have more presence? And Denmark would be very supportive of this. And so with the citizens of Greenland, they would love to have more presence here. They would love to have more US investment in mining. So to threaten Greenland, our ally, if you have something that you could do in a friendly negotiation or friendly handshake, it's really absurd. And especially absurd because Greenland and Denmark have been trying to get Trump and France's attention for 13 months of these threats. And they only recently managed to get their very first meeting to talk it over. So to threaten them for 13 months to try to achieve something you could do by saying, hello, we'd like to have extra soldiers there. Oh yeah, great, do come. We'd love to see more of you here. It doesn't make sense at all, does it? So that's if you go back to our idea of Trump as like a mafia boss trying to threaten a greengrocer to buy carrots, and he says, you need to watch out for yourself. Look at all these big heavy guys who've got about them. They're pointing guns at you. We could completely trash your stall. Please sell me your carrots at full price. I mean, that's essentially what Trump's doing. It doesn't make much sense, does it? And if you don't sell me your carrots at the normal price, then we'll trash your stall. I mean, that's essentially how he's doing it. It doesn't make sense at all, because they just want what he wants. So that's it. And then he said, that to think that Ronald Reagan would have had this discussion, he wouldn't. So he made it very clear that Ronald Reagan, so respected Republican from the past, Republican presidents, he honoured and valued their alliances, and so this is not a traditional Republican viewpoint. He says it's more like the 1890s through to 1930s, and then they learned from World War II before World War II. It's a Republican view of very, very far in the past that Trump seems to be reverting to. And he's saying this administration seems to have gotten all those lessons learned from World War II onwards. So that's what he's saying. But we forgot that we need to have close friends and alliances in the world. So that's what he said. I'll just do a few, and then this is another interview. Same chap, Don Bacon, with Omar Herald. It's not a video. It's in text. And he says that there's so many Republicans are mad about this. If he went through with the threats, I think it would be the end of his presidency. And he needs to know the off-ramp is realizing Republicans aren't going to tolerate this, and he's going to have to back off. He hates being told no, but in this case, I think Republicans need to be firm. So that's what he said in an interview. And on the impeaching, he said he thinks he would lean that way. And this is about a bill to limit the capability of US president to invade a NATO ally. And he thinks it's ridiculous it even has to be done. Utter buffoonery. You don't treat rallies this way. This is what you do with Russia or China or Iran, but not your best friends. I think it's totally wrong to treat your best friends like this and bully them. So, and then, oh yes, I should add a little bit here. There's a CNN poll that found that 75% of Americans oppose Trump's plans. Oh yes, I do say that. Yes, 100% of soldiers would surely oppose them if they know, as they know they legally have to. I should make it clear that is my own personal opinion, that it seems very clear that soldiers that have trained have so much training that they about the legality and what's legal and what isn't, and the law of war, they would know this is completely illegal. And so I expect any soldiers who were asked in that poll would be completely opposed to Trump's plans. And I expect the generals that Trump talks to would be opposed to it. They would have to be. They would just say, no, we can't do this, if he's ever tried talking about it to any generals. So that's that. That's the start of this. I'm going to go through this in somewhat more detail in a second video. So this is my first video I'll upload. It's just over 20 minutes. Hopefully that's about the right length for a nice, short, reasonably short video. And I think I've gone over most of the concerns that people have on this. And so then I'll expand in more detail about some of the things I've said in the rest of the video. So it's about NATO allies, but they're in small numbers. There's about, oh yes, and there's this bit about how it seems that the tariffs may have just been a mistake. So I'll talk about that in Trump's part. An interview with the Greenland politician. I'll just go through the titles here. You can get a first idea just by reading the titles. And so she said that I like the titles like that. So you can just read the titles. So I'll just read the titles for the rest of this and just quickly summarize them. So Greenlanders, they have a very different approach from the United States. Greenlanders don't own the land that they built their houses on. They just have an allotment for the house. And they see all the land of Greenland and all the sea as public. And that is their wealth. So they're not interested in buying lots of money. There's not very much they can actually do with money. They can't buy lots of land in Greenland with money, because they see it as these are the Inuit, and most of the Greenlanders are Inuits, and have a very different approach to the land and to nature and things from Americans. And so even if you were to give them £100,000 each, even at $100,000 per person, they wouldn't give up what they have. And they have free healthcare, and paid by taxes, but everyone pays their taxes, and then everyone gets free healthcare, free education, including grants for the education, not just paying for the education, but also paying for the living costs and so on for the students. And they're part of Europe, and they are very sovereign people within Denmark. Greenland has a lot of independence. They do things very differently from what they do in Denmark. So anyway, yes, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So then if you go and look at this, China and Russia have no military ships near Greenland. They have no capability to invade it against even a couple of hundred well-equipped US defenders. So I'll go into that in some depth as to why even a couple of hundred soldiers would be able to do that. Oh, so yes, I better embed some images here, because you need to see the images. And then Greenland would get no military assistance, which is a continuing protest. I could put some videos in there. And then why, it's about the supremacy clause, and I'll just go through that, and why it's illegal. And all the ways he could do it. He couldn't just declare it, that would be unconstitutional. He can't do it by coercion. So if the terrorists did succeed, it still wouldn't be valid. And then if you look at the idea of military junta, he can't do that through pardon power either, as I said in the introduction, so I'll go into that in more detail. And then I'll end this by talking about the first incentives, why journalists don't tell us that it's legally impossible for Greenland to become part of the US in US or EU or international law, which I think would diffuse a lot of this if people realise it just can't happen. But the journalists aren't telling us this, and it's so very clear. And most people depend on the journalists for their understanding of things, stories like this. They have very little other source of information to put it in perspective. And sadly, the journalists are not telling us the things that we need to know. So that's why we have to do this voluntary fact-checking. So that's my first video.